The following are some general considerations looking at the pandemics and the coronavirus in a kind of different and probably somewhat provocative perspective. Saying this means that I am well aware of the fact that we are facing a dramatic situation with most likely dramatic negative impact and consequences for many people. However, there is one consideration that may be left outside if we simply take this as the presumption of the way moving on. And I'm not talking about subjective aspects of we come to reasonable behavior now, getting more aware of things. I want to look at some objective facts. And looking at this means looking at the economic side in one perspective, and at the idea of lifestyles, modes of life on the other side. This refers back theoretically to my considerations on the theory of regulation with the four pillars, which may become more meaningful in the following, meaning facing a completely new constellation that emerges from the crisis now. So the four pillars are, again, the accommodation regime, the mode of regulation, the mode of living, and the life regime. So this is a basic understanding of making money, spending money, regulating how we do it collectively, and how we do it individually. Meaning we have a certain way of making money, which at the moment is the standard of being wage earner or entrepreneur, or official, which is a different status again. But it is the status as a group, as social group, as class, and it is the way, how do we individually cope with it, what do we make out of the situation. It may sound like a huge step, thinking about a term that is used in military strategic thinking. There is the term of overkill capacities, which I think is interesting to think about something that is completely absurd. Absurd in the sense of overkilling, meaning killing more than killing several times. That's the idea behind it. But doesn't it mean as well to kill somebody, or to kill people more than once? And this is the absurd thing. If you are dead, you are dead, and you cannot be a little bit dead, and things like this. Now, my idea is to use this absurdity and talk about overlife capacities. And I think it is overlife capacities and not overliving capacities. Meaning overlife, it is the more objective side, not the individual side. This is important to note. It is linked to the differentiation between life regime and mode of living. So the general side, the social, societal side, and the side of what do individuals do with something, the effect on people's life and persons living, if you want to use this term. And just a little bit of a linguistic twist here, or using something in German. The German has the term of survival, and this can be used in, if you look at the Überleben in German, you can take it as here this overliving, Überleben, over, survival, survivre, is as well living over the capacities we have. So this can be seen in linguistic terms as something that is of relevance here. Now, having these four pillars, accumulation regime, mode of regulation, life regime, and mode of living, we have something at the moment that we actually face a situation where we can say, not linking it to the current crisis, but where we can say we are actually living more lives in the time we have to live. We try to push everything that is thinkable into one life. We do not live anymore, but we have to live many lives within this one period of time we have. Now, this is not talking about different roles. We all play different roles. We are father, we are parent, we are teacher, we are worker, we are drivers, we are exercising some sports. This is one thing. This is, of course, in some way linked to what I'm talking about. But what I actually mean is a different thing, that while living, we are literally doing different things at the same time, at the very same time. It's a kind of the permanency of multitasking we face, and from this I want to propose the following thesis of my approach, this thinking of overlife capacities that societies today reached. So the thesis is that we find an overlife capacity stretching life to its edges, and that this is not simply a gap of having not enough time to do all the things we would like to do, and possibly not having the ability to do many things at the same time, but to systematically, in structured terms, putting more lives, what is supposed to be life, into this period of time we have and we are alive. It is not a gap, as I said, between what we want and what we can do, but it is the systematic structural gap or rupture between the capacities of our actual brain that is able to do something or not, and the capacities we can actually live. you may compare it with the capacities of an engine that can, for a short time, drive very fast or perform in high-speed terms, but this is not possible in a longer term, in a long time perspective. Then it is this kind of overheating, and any kind of overheating means in actual fact that you will break the engine, that you destroy it, unless you compensate for this extreme performance by way of underperforming in another area. And this is, I think, what happens. We have these weird things of an extremely fast-growing economy, of course different in different parts of the world and with different patterns, but it is something where we produce more than we can actually consume. All this is linked to questions of overaccumulation, and this is linked then, of course, of the permanency of the crisis of capitalism, and it is linked to the question of what this crisis is actually is about, and how to reduce it, and how to redistribute things again. But what we have is that we simplify this overproduction by way of an underproduction in certain areas. Meaning the capacities, the overcapacities we have in one place, we try to compensate to undercapacities in other areas. This is, in a way, just another take on questions of inequality, of distribution that neglects some kind of equality or equity even, and that is making it seemingly possible that some live more than one life and others don't live at all, even if they are alive, actually. This has an intellectual side as well, that, we'll call it intellectual or mental side as well, namely the issue that we reduce actually the intensity, the quality of living, of life, of consumption, that is permanently manifesting the difference between use value and exchange value. This overcapacity means that we are only talking about exchange value, that the entire system is running not by consumption, but by something that appears to be consumption, whereas in economic terms it is actually the permanency of producing rubbish. This can be the rubbish in literal terms, that we produce something that doesn't last any kind of meaningful time. It can be the production of rubbish in terms of packages and certain things of design or whatsoever. There is sometimes, it is at least difficult to draw a border, but sometimes it is very clear. And it can be as well the production of rubbish of paradoxical situations that keep the economy running, but are in actual fact from the outset designed not to last. We may speak of some kind of super artificialization, where we come to a stage of getting less from more, not being able to express or to grasp, to understand the real meaning, but to deal with little elements, putting them arbitrarily together. I engaged on different occasions with this in a recent paper, looking as well at or putting out terms like Googleization and Tinderization. There is a certain arbitrariness in it that is not involving even thinking about something that we may call essence. The essence is happening on the surface, and it is there for the moment, but it doesn't last. It doesn't go back to something emerging logically or genuinely from something. It is in this moment authentic, but authentic because it lost its context. It lost even claiming that there is a context, and it doesn't claim or work towards a perspective. I try to translate something which is not the proper translation here, from a book that is looking at museums and at exhibitions, stating, and this is finally the question every museum and every exhibition has to tackle, or at least it should be the question. What do I initiate? This is not only a question, or this is not a question only of entertainment or of pure elitism. Both poles, entertainment and elitism, simplify things, and our culture makes the mistake to focus on the poles. The air in the high culture is getting thinner and thinner, and the protagonists are enjoying this. The variation of permanently the same is accelerating. At the same time, this banalization seems to be limitless. We all complain about it, and we miss or we lack that there is anything like a shared world of experience and thinking. As had a rough translation, the book is by Daniel Tyradilis, Müde Museen, Tired Museums, and it is on page 54 following. And in many cases we use wrong terms here, like the knowledge society or something like this, which is simply a matter of information societies. We are not dealing with knowledge. There is some knowledge involved, but in actual fact many of us are simply dealing with information. They get the information, they process the information without actually knowing what it is about and how it works. It is a simplified way of dealing with ingredients of action, ingredients of practice, without or at the same time losing the understanding what it is, what actually is behind it. We use machine translation, which is sometimes excellent. We use digital cameras, now important part, if we trust the advertisement of mobile phones, which means we shoot pictures, without actually looking and designing the scene that we want to capture. I will come back later to this designing, because it is as well a very a factor full of contradictions. But before that, some of these absurd situations of overproduction. And there is, of course, looking at examples, always the danger of some kind of bashing, of blaming individual occurrences for something that goes systematically wrong. Nevertheless, let's take some examples of what I mean, of overproduction that is actually not simply the economic overproduction, but that it is part of this, what I call overlife strategy. Digitization plays, of course, a huge role wherever we go, and we use machine translation. In a way, an excellent thing, but at the same time, hugely problematic, but because it reduces language. It considers that we speak actually language without knowing about the nuances that are part of it. We use terms of power, of being able to, of controlling. It seems to be all the same. We look at terms of seeing, which is looking, which is envisaging, which is, again, many things that seem to be interchangeable, but where the actual use is something highly differentiated that requires a knowledge of the situation, of the context, all this. It is actually interesting to see how it works and to think about the direction it may work, may take. This is another digital tool, if you use your computer and dictate text, then you come to situations where you see actually it writes along what you say, and at some stage it goes back and controls itself. So it is the contextualization used by the computer. What the computer thinks this is the context, and correcting itself what it understood ex post, and says, no, this is probably something else than what I originally understood. It is interesting how it works, and it is interesting sometimes really that it works in a positive way, meaning it gets the context that we actually mean, and sometimes one is wondering, how is it possible actually to contextualize in this way? Just from some recent experience using the German dictating, I was dictating, I was putting out the text, and I saw it written, kann also nichts Richtiges. Then I moved on and the text had been changed, kann also nichts Wichtiges, nichts Objektives beitragen. And then after a while it changed again, kann also nichts Richtiges, nichts Objektives beitragen. So the translation into English is it cannot do anything correct. changing to it cannot do anything important, nothing objectively correct, and then changing back to it can nothing correct, objectively correct. This is an interesting move, I think, of a computer contextualizing things according to something that seems to be in the text. Now, in this case, it was actually correct, but I think it is obvious that we can imagine situations, or that we can imagine constellations where this doesn't make any sense, and where the context, the thought by the computer, is actually nothing near to what we have had in mind. We use, I nearly said, would have said photo cameras. We use telephones to make phone calls sometimes, but actually we don't use telephones so much to make actual phone calls, but we use them for other things, like social networks, WeChat, WhatsApp, Telegram, and whatever the name is, Kakao, different in different areas, Korea using and Japan using Kakao, and China using WeChat, and Facebook uses the Western world by making everybody use WhatsApp. Anyway, this is another thing, and I don't want to talk about the political dimension to it in this way of surveillance capitalism. This is, of course, important as well. But what I have in mind is we use these instruments, we use as well the mobile phone to make photos. And the camera is a very important point in advertising the new models and the model to be sold. The camera of this phone is better, is improved, has this and that feature, and this is the reason for buying this and that phone. I'm not talking about buying a camera. And this, of course, means as well that making photos is something we spontaneously do, which sometimes excellent snapshots, but we do not think about what we are doing. We make the photos, and afterwards we say, well, this is rubbish, we delete this, and this is great, and this is really great, and we put it on Facebook or whatever the moments. There is another thing, the online business now, booming since several years already, and I had been surprised actually, especially seeing young people using it to buy, for instance, clothes, dresses, shoes. Something where I would say I first want to see it not in a photo, but actually on me. Does it really fit? Does it really suit me? Now, what I heard then is, why not buy it? Because it's easy to send it back. And increasingly I came, now having to use online business as well, I come across actually the retour already prepared. You get a label, if you're not happy with it, send it back to the producer, to the sales agency or whatever, and here's everything you need for it. So part of the business is the consideration, we know that you will not keep it. Of course, we know in a shop, if we go there, we try different things and we know we won't buy all of them. We will go for one item and look at 10 or 20 or whatever the mood is like. This brings into play another dimension of it, the outlets where you have to buy now because tomorrow you don't know if it is there. There is one chain shop, it would be interesting to know exactly what is behind it, but they promise, I think, 60% less of the official retail price. But you have to buy it now because you don't know if it's still there tomorrow. They may have, if you are lucky, 2 of the same jumpers, but that's it. They don't have a third and they don't have 10 there. And if you ask them, would you have this in a different size? They say, well, have a look. If it's there, we have. If it's not there, we don't. And we don't get it. We cannot actually get it. So in this way, overproduction, but overproduction in terms of you have to put more into your life than you can actually cope with. You produce and deal with information instead of dealing with knowledge. Now we come to paradox. Because all this suggests that we spontaneously do things without consideration and without a plan, and it just happens. But the paradox is we come more and more to a situation where actually curate things. I was looking at this in terms of curating exhibitions. And this is what a curator traditionally does, looking at how to exhibit certain items, what is relevant for this exhibition and what is not relevant. And increasingly we curate our entire life. We make designs, we present ourselves in exactly this way of how can we appear to ourselves? What do we want to be? How do we want to present ourselves? And how do we want to be perceived by the other? Nothing new with it and nothing wrong with it, but at the same time reaching a certain level where this presentation is taking over, it's becoming a value in itself, like the exchange value, and it is not about presenting what we are, it is not about producing what we need, but it is presenting what we want to, or how we want to appear to others. It is something we find in the book Night Train to Lisboa. Life is not what we really live, but it is what we imagine to live. This had been written by Prado. I can't recall the pages. Night Train to Lisboa. Referring to this curating things, 2 books I was reading. The one is Ways of Curating by Hans Ulrich Obrist, and the other is Curationism, how curating took over the art world and everything else. Mind the everything else by David Balzer. It's interesting to see, especially in the second book I mentioned, it is, as it is stated in the beginning, it is not about arts anymore, it is about a sociological thing, as it is said, it is about something that is part of everyday's life of everybody, taken, of course, from the arts world, but having a completely new status today and in today's world, that is not postmodern, but that is actually accelerating this eclipse of modernity, the one side of modernity and modernization, towards something that is reduced to small packages, that is reduced in its rationality, and reduced to something that is calculable, not understood, and possibly where understanding is simply not possible. It may be in some cases a fine line, and in many cases I think it is very obvious to order something via mail order, by the way existing since 100 years or something like this, it's not so new, or ordering something via mail order in order to send it back, or to send part of it back. Not thinking, in a way not curating, in order to curate. I think this is one of the core issues of paradoxes, that we do something in order not to do it. So we have digitization, making photos, or taking pictures instead of making photos, instead of intensely looking at what we want, what kind of picture we want, what expression is behind it, what we want to express with taking this photo. It is as well then, of course, this extreme of utilitarianism, of Taylorism, of situation. Everything is being tailored, which is part of this process of curating. Everything is tailored in or by way of performing at the moment. It's not life, it is living. And if we can perform in different ways at the same time, it is even better. And it is an extreme of division of labor. The first thing that needs to be said is that apparently everything is labor. We don't engage in a relation anymore, but it is the work, the labor of relations, the labor of educating instead of relating to somebody, children or not, whom we educate. It is not this mutuality of the process, but it is this one-sided performance of diversified and hugely divided labor. It is not part of an entire process, but basically everybody can do whatever he or she is asked to do. I never found valid information, but I had heard about it a couple of times, that actually a German university was sending exam papers of students to India and to get them corrected there. Cheap labor, exploiting cheap labor. Of course, the Indians could not know. They could not be, or it was not even a matter of intelligence, of being intelligent, but it was something they could not know what this question really was about, or how it fitted into the context of teaching. It was multiple choice reduced on something that is quantifiable, and one probably has to say, fortunately, they didn't find enough German speakers who could do this, so they stopped this kind of business. Again, something putting more into it than having the educational process of a teacher at the primary school or of a university as complex interaction of the institution, of society, of the individual teacher and individual students, and the knowledge. The knowledge not being something mechanically reproducible, but as well part of this complex societal situation. Education reduced and education reducible on something that actually lost its value. What do we find as a result of this? I would say the entire idea of overlife capacities means as well that we are dealing with a situation that is fundamentally characterized by alienation. Alienation of activities. They are not genuinely complex activities, but they are individual acts. It is not about behavior in a complex way, but it is about doing something at this very moment. It is alienated from use value. We enter exchange processes just to be part of these exchange processes without that there is a meaning to it. This is why we can go to the supermarket and not go to the small shop or the farmer's market, where it is part of communication, where it is part possibly of bargaining, things like this. And it is alienation as well by way of not sufficiently doing a complex design, but of curating, of exhibiting at the moment what it is about. And in effect, we find an accumulation of productivity, but an accumulation of productivity without any meaningful result, meaningful in terms of a complex situation of being, and the only meaning is or seems to be to keep the system running. There are these interesting figures. If we look at the terms of conditions we sign with every act of trade, buying something very small, buying a huge and very expensive, valuable item, we enter a contract, and with this contract, there are these terms and conditions. We sign them, although we do not know them. Most likely, we do not read them. And if we would read them every time, we would spend so much time into it that we actually could not be able, in terms of time, to use whatever we buy. Just a quote, the model American puts in 1,600 hours to get 7,500 miles, less than 5 miles an hour, not much more than he could travel on his feet. Overlife and overliving, not in the sense of surviving, survivre, but, well, in a way, exactly this, of survivre, standing above life and being completely alienated. In a book, I don't know the exact reference from where he has it. It's an interview book with Hans-Dieter Schütt interviewing Gerhard Gundermann, the petrol station, the fuel station for losers, talks with Gerhard Gundermann, reminiscence. So he has something about what the human being, actually I try to translate again spontaneously, what human beings need for life. It is a chimney that smokes. That is the old ideology of producing just for the sake of producing. Now, in the so-called modern agriculture today, we need 1 kilocalorie nutrition to be produced. We need 2.5 kilocalories energy. So to produce 1 kilocalorie food, we use 2.5 kilocalories energy. The side effect, the tractors, the heavy machines destroy the soil. The soil is overused, and the monocultures are increasingly prone to deadly insects, to negative insects. This is not just stupid stupidity in ecological terms, but as well in economic terms. At the same time, it is the well-developed, best developed, most effective, most effective machine that is put aside, that is not used anymore, and that is the human farmer. And of course, this is not without problems, to state it this way. By the way, it is page 32 in the said book. It is not just this one example. We can, of course, refer to it, but it is a much more complex thing. And he goes on writing then, moving then on to artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence replaces something that we can do much better. But there is no reason to replace it. In many cases, it doesn't make things easier for people to live, replacing hazardous activities. This is, of course, one thing, but in many cases, it is not about that. It is just about replacing something for the sake of replacing it. As I frequently say, in academia, in scientific work, we answer questions without actually thinking about what the question is, if it is a valid question, and where it goes, and if we actually have to ask the question, or better to say, if we need the answer. If we would thoroughly think about the question, we probably would come to the conclusion that we answered it by leaving it aside, by not finding a technical answer that is an expression of overlife, of standing above life, not being there to survive in the strict sense. So it is a waste of time. We paradoxically use more energy to produce something than it actually replaces. The same is true in terms of farming. The amount of energy we use there to produce less crop actually than we put into it. All these paradoxes are part of an attempt to put more life, or to use living in a different way, and use living in a way of its overcapacities. The collection of appointments instead of the attendance to meetings. Possibly we go to different meetings at the same time, meaning that we of course do not really attend one of them. The one may be online, the other may be showing something by writing to somebody who sits next to us, and the next is we text with a mobile phone or send emails at the same time. All these multitasking capacities that do not really work, and that are showing the danger of designing something, curating something that does not have any substance. And this is, of course, then resulting in an overheating economically. We produce, we know that it is not sold, but we accept this, and the economic value, the foundation of calculating economic value needs to be reconsidered. It's as well, we have to reconsider the use of time. There's this, I think, funny term of quality time, spending quality time with somebody, with the children, with the family, with friends. This is the exception apparently, because we have to emphasize that this is quality time. We could go on and find different examples of what the actual fact is. It's overstretching everything, and it is overstretching as well exploitation. Anand Singh talks about this super exploitation. Many things coming together, and the important part is the fundamental alienation of losing actually life, losing control over life by trying to live more than one life at one time. Now let's look briefly towards the end at education. There is this point of educating people, and it is increasingly a commercial act. We go to universities, we go to schools, private schools, and buy education, buy the best education we can get. But at the same time, it is increasingly limited. And as educators, we are increasingly not working as educators, but we are working as somebody who performs, if you want, performs in a way of selling something that is quantifiable, but does not have, in the extreme case, a qualitative value. And this is very important when it comes to precarity and the modern way of educating for the digital age, or what is called education for the digital age, that we provide education that actually is not marketable. We say there is a job and you have to be trained for this, but in actual fact, whenever you are there, the job doesn't exist anymore. We do not educate people by providing knowledge that makes it possible for them to understand things, but we are providing knowledge that makes it possible to perform in a situation, in a very specific situation, without actually being able to understand what this situation is about. In this way, we can deal with multitasking as well, because it is just pressing the button, pressing a key, without understanding of what is actually going on. Now, this is one trend, and of course we find as well with digital instruments the other side. But this is important when we think about education, precarity, digitisation, education in the digital age. It is about something looking for ways not to close gaps, but to open platforms on which people can act, not independently, but on the contrary, as part of society, as part of a societal setting, which is always as well a socio-economic setting. Rough ideas, they need to be explored, they need to be elaborated, but I think it is worthwhile to think about these ways, not in terms of where does education go, not in terms of where does the economy go, but more in terms of where does society go and where do we want society to go, possibly using the current crisis for a new normal when we get out of it, instead of coming back to the normal. A difficult situation, because it in actual fact requires more action, more activities than we can provide and perform.